Dungeon theming offers some of the most important parts of the Zelda games in my opinion, and they're a giant part of what makes a Zelda dungeon fun for me. If you watched any of my videos discussing dungeons in the series, you'll know that atmosphere is key in these games for me. So when it comes to the sequel of Breath of the Wild, a game that I personally didn't think did dungeon theming that well, I have quite a few opinions on the specific theming of the dungeons in the game. So that's why we have a whole video today to discuss just that. But as I do in these Breath of the Wild 2 videos, it's important that we look back at dungeon theming in previous games in the series. So hello trenders, and before we get started, if you end up enjoying the video, please make sure to subscribe to join the 13% of other people who are watching this video that are already subscribed. It'd mean the world to me, and you can always unsubscribe. With that said, let's get this video underway. First, let's talk about the dungeon theming in all of the 3D games before Breath of the Wild released. Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. There were many different types of dungeon theming, but the main few always ended up being something like this: water, forest, fire, and desert themed dungeons. There were, and are, many different variants of these types of dungeons, so here are some examples. Forest Temple and Inside the Deku Tree in Ocarina of Time, Forbidden Woods in Wind Waker, Forest Temple in Twilight Princess, and of course Skyview Temple in Skyward Sword. These are usually at the very start of each game, as you might have noticed, but they all have a very similar sort of vibe as well. Wind Waker's is a little different, but that's just down to the game's core theming in of itself, instead of the entire place's vibe. Usually these temples or dungeons are very somber, asking for Link to be quiet and reminisce, though it's slightly different for Twilight Princess, in which the Forest Temple is pretty much run by some animals that Link must gather and use to get to the end. In fact, usually in these dungeons there are a ton of insects that are just roaming around. This is to highlight that you'll be facing off against even more than just animals later in each game. Instead, you'll be fighting humanoid creatures. In fact, Majora's Mask does this even better, since at the end of the dungeon you're put up against a humanoid creature, which creates a genuinely horrifying atmosphere. As you notice, you've not been put up against anything like that in the past so far. To ensure this video doesn't go on for much longer than it really needs to, I'll run through these other themes fairly quickly. Fire dungeons are usually near the start of each game too, and they're just great. They offer a lot of combat and will set an atmosphere that somebody created everything that you're in. As an example of this, and the greatest example I can think of on the spot, the Goron mines in Twilight Princess. Mines created by the Gorons that you explore to try and find other Gorons who may be able to help you on your quest. Water dungeons are usually pretty calm. There are some outliers like Great Bay Temple or inside of Jabu Jabu's belly, but they usually offer many different puzzles and fun boss fights, though the bosses are also probably some of the most disappointing in the series so far. Finally are the desert themed dungeons: Arbiter's Ground, Spirit Temple, technically Stone Tower Temple, Sandship, Lanayru Mining Facility. These are a very mixed bag and are themed very differently, but I find these to be some of the best in the series down to how lonely the hero feels when he's in these dungeons. For these ones in particular, Link is usually in an area that has been abandoned by the general public, and usually you can also see times where these places were slightly more populated, either through cutscenes or through the gameplay itself, like in the case of Sandship in Skyward Sword. Some other key dungeon themes we'll discuss later are dark themed dungeons, ice or snow themed dungeons, dungeons themed around ancient civilizations, and finally, sky themed dungeons. And honestly, I think we could see each of these themes presented in the next game. But more on each of them and how they could play into the next game later. Next up for dungeon theming is Breath of the Wild. This will be quite quick because the theming itself isn't inherently bad in the slightest really, it's just extremely basic and overall not really that fleshed out. Though in these cases I think the dungeon themes are seen more so outside of the beast, so Vah Ruta is the water dungeon, Vah Meadow is your sky dungeon, Vah Naboris is the desert dungeon, and finally Vah Rudania is the fire dungeon. All that's missing from the four main dungeon types is a forest dungeon, and considering Korok Forest's relevance in Breath of the Wild's story, that's not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. As hinted at already, dungeon theming was done slightly different in the next game. There wasn't that much in the way of theming inside of the dungeons, but if you take a peek at the outside of those dungeons, you'll see all of those themes outside. There is usually some amount of puzzling with those themes though. To avoid this video becoming too long, it's time to talk about Breath of the Wild 2. Plus, I mean, there isn't really much else to talk about, as sad as that is to say. So, time to talk about Breath of the Wild 2 and some of the dungeon themes that I feel like should be included in the latest game in the series. Well, let's look at some of the things we've seen in trailers so far. First of all, we've seen a few areas that are pretty dark. If there are traditional-ish dungeons in the next game, then I'd expect there to be at least one dungeon set in a cave or a darker area. Maybe it's a throwback to Ocarina of Time's Shadow Temple, where you have to go to Kakariko's graveyard. Point is, this theme could come with a few different perks. First of all, much scarier creatures, and an atmosphere even more potent than that of the Palace of Twilight and the Shadow Temple. This could be a pretty crazy feat considering how atmospheric both of those areas were respectively, but Shadow Temple always felt genuinely scary to explore for me, going deeper into the depths and even riding a pirate ship underground. This is actually the closest I think we've been to seeing the real underneath of Hyrule in its entirety, down to the sheer size of that Shadow Temple. Maybe having villagers in the next game tell the player of how scary an area is in the map before Link goes over there could be a good way of doing this. This theme could be done through a usual cave this time around too. Maybe you're exploring and suddenly you come across a massive cave opening. Wandering inside leads to a loading screen, ultimately bringing you into a dungeon where you're greeted by some creepy crawlies like some Skulltulas. I'm pretty certain we'll get at least one darker themed dungeon, if not most of them in the overworld having a darker theme somewhere on that spectrum. Another type of dungeon I'm expecting in the next game is a dungeon set in the sky. This is mostly down to the insane amount of structures that seem to be scattered throughout the entirety of the sky in the next game. I mean, heck, it almost feels like we've seen the whole sky map already with the amount of islands we've seen, and I don't even think we've seen doubles of them yet either. Namely, while I've discussed it being some other things in other videos, I definitely believe that this upside down pyramid looking structure could be a dungeon, and I actually think it might be the gauntlet that tends to be in every single Zelda game, starting you at the bottom and slowly working you up to the top. Or maybe it's a dungeon with a similar premise. Honestly, I'm not so sure, but I might have to look further into it for a future video. Point is, I expect something in the sky to pose a threat, especially since the delay video for the game had a shot that I presume is set in the sky from the few pixels that you can see outside of the floor and our hero. In fact, it could be at the top of this pyramid, who knows. I'm also sort of expecting the three other main types of dungeons we saw in the last game. A water, fire, and desert dungeon. Respectively, I'd expect these areas to be seen around Lake Hylia, around the backside of Elden Volcano, and even though it's 100% a pipe dream, I would really like the desert dungeon to be set in the Alps' grounds. If that was sat in the sky as a giant structure, it would solicit feelings that I have never felt from a Zelda game through bringing back previous areas. Now, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't expecting there to be at least around 7 dungeons in the next game, or at the very least more dungeons than the previous game, given the amount of time that's been put into this one. I'm guessing that a lot of time has been put into shrine equivalents and the dungeons themselves as opposed to the last game. Or at least I'm hoping so personally, so I'll end this video off with one last dungeon theme. I think we'll see. Then a bonus couple. Now, I think we'll see the Ancient Civilization theme, previously seen in dungeons like the Tower of the Gods, the shrines themselves, the Temple of Time, or Sky Keep. I just think that, considering Link is dressed much like the hero of 10,000 years prior, we could see the team explore that civilization a little bit more when the player is in the sky, offering as much as an entire dungeon on the matter. The next couple of bonus ones are just obvious themes that I would really appreciate. In fact, I feel like the team might not want to do the same themes in the sequel, so these could be interchanged for those 4 themes from the last game. I would love snow and forest themed dungeons, maybe a jungle themed dungeon because of, well, Faron, but especially a snow one. Hyrule was such a cool region in the last game, but there was very little to do there except shrines and, well, shield surfing. Having a big landmark there in the next game would be really entertaining, though I'll have a whole video on how Hyrule could be changed in the future. Finally, and something I feel like a lot of people have speculated on, is a dungeon set in Korok Forest. It had such a big part to play in Breath of the Wild, so having just as big of a part by having a whole new dungeon just sat there would be great, especially if it involves the Deku Tree in some way, or maybe if the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time was rediscovered. Whatever the case, it would be a welcome inclusion. Now, what ideas for dungeon themes do you guys and girls have for Breath of the Wild 2? Let me know in that comment section down below, and let me know some things that you think would come with these themes, like enemies, locations, and whatever else you can think of. Here's some ideas that I received from my Twitter before this upload. Follow my Twitter now if you want the chance at a little shout in a future video, as I'll be doing this weekly now, but only a few people will be seen rather than all of them like now. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, then please do support me by leaving a like rating and subscribing as we wait for more Breath of the Wild 2 news. Along with being a part of the 13% of people who are subscribed, you'll also get a stream every Wednesday as long as you want to join, so thank you a ton if you do subscribe. The people you can see on screen right now are my Patreon supporters, and I barely give them all enough credit. So again, thank you all so much for the support, guys, and a massive thank you to both Sumji and Jared Weedham with those cool looking fonts and colours, as they are my top paying patrons. Again, thank you so much for the support. If you'd like to join them, then you can do for as little as £1 or $1.50 a month. The link to my Patreon is in the description, and along with that link is a link to the rest of my media platforms, so do follow me on them to keep in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next Sunday unless you join the stream on Wednesday. Well, thank you, and please do stay safe.